I think we're live.
All right. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk About Sex with the beautiful, the amazing Joanna Kennedy. Naked and Exposed. It's been fun putting this project together and kind of noticing and feeling into what we might talk about. And so, um, to get us started, I think that we might just lay a foundation of saying, almost anything goes in this interview. Is that fair to say,
Yes.
Joanna?
Yeah, it totally is, George. I'm ready to be as exposed as I can.
Awesome, because this is such a charged topic in our culture, and with you being an expert in sex and relationships and the masculine and the feminine, I think it's such a wonderful topic for us to explore, go deep on, and maybe even bust some myths and have some fun around this topic. So. To get us started, what do you say you just tell us a little bit about your background, your sexual story, and anything that wants to show up there?
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to do that. So, God, there's so much to the story. I've laughed as I've thought about doing this tonight, and excuse me, just one moment. I have a technical difficulty where I've left sound on that shouldn't be on. Let's try that. So we're not getting background noise. Okay, so my story. It was crazy, actually, how all of this unfolded for me. And if I would have ever thought that I was going to be doing what I'm doing and having a, quote, naked and exposed interview about sexuality, I couldn't have imagined it, because I grew up conservative, Lutheran, and not super religious, but religion was a big part of my life, and that conservative nature of the Midwest was a really big part of my life. And I found myself, interestingly enough, an electrical engineer in the oil and gas industry in what I call the good old boy network of Houston. And what I learned really well was how to operate in what I'll call a man's world. And no, the business world is not necessarily a man's world, but there's a lot of ways that when we talk about masculine and feminine energy, that's the energy that pervades business. And so as women stepped in, we're powerful, we're making huge contributions, but we've had to deal with this different energy than how we naturally flow. And so a lot of that was showing up and doing business the way business had always had been done. And so not so easy for women to be who they naturally are in our emotion, in our free flow. There's a lot more linearness to business. So there's a lot more masculine energy in it. And so as I got down the road in that career in the oil and gas industry and the high-tech industries, I was really, really unhappy. And I had a really, really lousy sex life. And when I talk about lousy, well, what's lousy mean? Well, there wasn't a lot of it. What there was of it, I had what do I want to say? The fears that it was bad. I was certainly non-orgasmic. And it was a time where I was just consistently frustrated. And yet inside, oh my God, inside myself, I could feel this desire and this passion that wanted to come out. And I will often tell the story is that I used to complain that, why do I keep meeting all these sexually repressed men? Well, years down the road, I was like, oh, wow, it was never them. It was me. And so that was a huge wake-up call to know that a lot of the reasons that I didn't have the sex life, I didn't have the pleasure and the ecstasy that my body longed for, was because I wasn't allowing it. And so there was a real awakening when I realized how much of my feminine nature, how much of my woman I had repressed and shut down and pushed away. And when I started to discover that, I went on a deep, deep inner journey to find the feminine in me, to meet the masculine men that I was attracted to, but never seemed to date. And so in that, I looked at masculine feminine dynamics. I studied sacred sexuality and Tantra. I studied every aspect of relationship that I could study. I did deep spiritual and emotional healing work because there were lots of wounds and shutdowns, and we'll probably get into it, but first sexual experiences, oh my God, not so good. And there were lots of hurts and what I'll call wounds and fears around sexuality. So I did tons to move through that. And then finally, where it kind of, not necessarily where it came together, but also integrated in partner yoga and how do we really communicate and meet on a level that's magnetic, passionate, juicy, hot, and really loving and connected and supportive. So those were the pieces of my journey that really brought me to this point. And I'm so excited that I get to love sex today and I get to talk about it and share it and bring it back. My mission is to make this a topic that is acceptable, that is not just acceptable, but pleasurable, that's fun to talk about, that we can open the doors and we don't have to do it. You know, we don't have to just have sex behind closed doors. And I'm not necessarily promoting that we're out in public, but to take down the limitations of how we can talk about it and what we can do and what's okay and what's not okay, and get the shame and the guilt out and the pleasure and the joy and the ecstasy back in.
Yeah. You know, as you're just sharing your story, there's a couple things that pop up for me. I know for a lot of my life, I attempted to get sex right, to try to do it right, which completely took me out of being like present and in the moment, you know, with the person that I was with. How much would you say that, like, from your upbringing when you were kind of struggling and moving through some of your stuff, how much of it was about like trying to get it right, and how did you work through it?
Oh, wow. There was an aspect of trying to get it right, but there was a bigger aspect of trying to be the good girl. And that was probably the most formative part. You know, when I look back to my teenage years and there was this curiosity and I was attracted to men and my body was doing all the things that bodies do and I wanted to play, but that conditioning of society was don't even think about it until you're married. And then, you know, I played all the games and I hear the stories of the teenagers today. They're playing, you know, even deeper games than what I did 25 years ago. But you know, there was the way of, okay, well, if we just touch here or we just do this, and as long as we don't have intercourse, but we do anything else, then we're okay. But at the same time, I'd walk away from those experiences feeling ashamed, feeling guilty. And it was probably about it was maybe a little longer than that, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. I did this one process, a clearing, healing process, and I woke up to a memory of where I didn't want to do too much, so I didn't give too much to my boyfriend. And sure enough, because I wouldn't have sex with him, he broke up with me. And then so I'm trying to be good girl, but he breaks up. And then it's like, well, then if I do it, you know, then I'm judged for being sleazy. I'm judged for being, you know, and so it was like, I woke up of like, God, I have this relationship of damned if you do and damned if you don't with my sexuality. It's like, you're not wanted if you do, and you're not wanted if you don't. And it was tough. And those were huge. You know, I've constantly felt like there was this shadow on my shoulder of what was okay. And I've just continually, piece by piece by piece, pulled the beliefs that were never really true, and certainly never mine, out of my consciousness so that I can open up and not feel shamed and not feel bad.
So would you say that on the planet right now there is an air or an energy of sexual repression right now overall in general?
Yeah, I think...
And
go ahead.
Yeah, and like from that, because I think a lot of people feel that repression, and what's the balance, I guess, from your expert standpoint, what's the balance between like fully unleashing and going out and just like, you know, getting busy with a ton of people and like the balance between between that and just being like having that self-control, what's that balance for you, you think?
That's a great question, and it's actually that ties into some of the questions that were actually submitted by people that are watching, and I'm so grateful that you sent your questions in, and there's a couple of different things that come up as you ask that question, George, and one is that I do believe that there's a ton of repression that still exists, that the puritanical ways that this country in particular was founded really still play out in our sexuality. And then there's also Dr. Oz. He's done some phenomenal speaking around this topic, and he talks about how there's a sexual famine in America. And I think so it's a combination, actually, I think, of repression, the puritanical beginnings, and a famine that has come on from the intensity of the way we live life right now and the busyness, and that we don't take the time to connect and really have the joys, the pleasures, the ecstasy that we used to. And that's really a big part of the mission, is that repression on a physical level for each of us, whether we're men or women, there's a way in which it shuts down our vitality. Actually, Dr. Oz talks about that too, is that when we bring healthy, conscious sexuality back to our life, it really does increase our vitality. Our sexual center is also our life center. It's the part that births our energy. And if you ever notice that, like, when you get really turned on by something, it doesn't have to be sexuality, but you get turned on by something that is just your business or your passion, and it's like your whole body comes alive, as it does when you're in the physical sexual connection. And that's what we want to wake up. There's so much tiredness. There's so much depression. And if we bring a healthy, conscious sexuality back to it, it really starts to break us free, not just in bed, but also in all of our lives. And to speak to the part of, so did you just go out and go, have a free-for-all? There's no rules around it. But my invitation to people in the way that I live my life is to listen to what's true. And not just what's true, but what's my motivation. And if I'm trying to fill a hole, if I'm lonely, if I'm just, if there's how many notches can I get on the bedpost kind of mentality, or actually a young girl, college girl, when I did a panel at Naropa University last year, she asked about open relationships and multiple partners. And you could tell she was doing that and asking that question because she thought it was how she could get the connection that she was longing for. And I spoke to her after the panel and I said, is that really, really deep down what you want? She's like, no, but I think that's what other people want. And so I don't have a rule, and actually I have no rules around sexuality. It's finding the truth. But if I had a piece of guidance for people, it would be to really listen. You can have amazing sexuality with people and sex and intimacy with people that you're not in relationship with, male or female. It's depending on our ages. It's easier for men and women, and at some point we'll dive in. I'm not going to go into all those details in this moment, but both men and women are capable of having a friends with benefits, or a sacred, if you step into sacred sexuality, a sacred partnership that is not just our romantic partnership, and it's really at your core, what do you want to experience in terms of sexuality, and then bring that consciously, openly, and honestly to who you're meeting. And it's the honesty that's the fundamental part. If you're looking for friends with benefits, then be honest about it. If you're looking for a deep, passionate, long-term relationship, be honest about it. And I've had moments just recently, or in the recent couple of years, where I have finally opened into, for me, I always wanted one partner, and have explored what's it like if I'm not in a relationship. Can I be intimate with someone? And I've found that yes, I can. I don't know that I could have done it as well in my 20s and my early 30s when I was still in my deeper hormonal childbearing years, because oxytocin plays a whole role in how much we bond to the partner that we've been intimate with. But it's very possible. So I give you permission, if that's the truth of what you want, men or women, have the intimate relationships that support you, whether that's in a relationship or out of a relationship, be honest with yourself, be honest with your partner, and have what most supports you.
Nice. I know you do events, and you do very powerful transformational events around sexual healing, or around masculine and feminine. And, I remember a couple of years ago when I took one of your, I think it was a 3-day weekend class, and just how much transformation I got from it, and how much I let go of all the, so many illusions and limitations that I had learned growing up. A lot of my early on childhood was, watching porn at a young age and being programmed around, porn was how sex was supposed to be done. And it plagued me for a really long time in my life. And so when you talk about like sexual healing, what is it, do you think, that most people in general are sort of like holding in, or what's the common wounds that you find within people around sexuality?
Yeah, those are really good questions. Some of it comes back to what were our first experiences. And, early on for me, it was like there was total fear. Nobody taught me how to have sex. Nobody taught me how to be with a man. And I remember very vividly the first time I reached out and touched a man's penis. I was so scared. And to tell you the truth, in a lot of ways, I was disgusted. I didn't know. I was maybe 16. And it was like, what do I do with this? I don't know what to do. And the truth is that carried with me for a long time of feeling incompetent. And the number of calls that I get from men and women who really want to be good lovers, but don't know how, or they question it. They really are, but they question how good they are. And I think that's, whether somebody has laughed at us in the past because we didn't do it right, or we did it funny because we didn't know what to do. And we can take that in and shut it down. And it's just like when you talk about the pornography and the impression that tells us of how we're supposed to be. And you can take that to the flip side. So now I think that as a man, I'm supposed to be that kind of a lover, or I'm supposed to want a man that way as a woman. And there's some things that happen in pornography that are, reasonably authentic. There's a lot of things that push the edges so far. It's like, no way. And so it's this wanting to be competent. And it's also then setting expectations that are so far beyond what the truth is for me. And at the same time, our conservativeness in general of a society, I'm going to invite you to open that bubble of comfort zone, but to take one step at a time. What's next? How do I open? How do I share a little bit more? And so the competency, I would say, is without a doubt, that fear of not being good at it is without a doubt the biggest thing that people show up. And then the other piece is probably, sadly enough, the amount of sexual abuse that shows up for both men and women, and the experiences where we haven't been respected, we haven't been honored. And those are big wounds that have to be honored before we can really step into the fullness of our sexuality. And yeah, those are key. The ways that we haven't been respected. And the one other one, it popped in and then it popped out and I was trying to find it, is for women.
And it popped out,
yes. But for women, the amount of times early on that we're so wanting to connect, and young men having their amazingly high sex drive, and we'll say yes when we really don't want to. And so that wanting to please, the wanting to be loved, the wanting to have connection. And so a lot of times, and this was a big part of my journey, was coming back and forgiving myself and setting my boundaries of being able to really say no. Because the truth is, if you can't say no, you really can't say yes either. No is critical to the yes. So those are the biggest wounds that I think people have to work through.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's so much conditioning and programming, as you mentioned, around sexuality and like what it's supposed to look like, what it should look like. versus, just being ultra present with, what this person requires in the moment. And I know you're an expert in Tantra too. Can you talk about how Tantra plays into, I guess, number one, overcoming some of those old wounds and also becoming a very good lover through tantric practice?
I love that question. Ooh. Yeah, Tantra. And I didn't really know what Tantra was when I put out an intention to the universe on New Year's Eve about 8 years ago, that said, you know what, this coming year, I want to do a Tantra class. And sure enough, as when I'm really in line with my heart's desire, the universe responds. So about 3 weeks later, I met a man who I started dating, and he was actually a tantric healer. And I was like, so what's that? And there's many aspects to Tantra and sacred sexuality. And one of them is a deeply healing practice, healing these wounds. And I'll come back to that and talk about it in more depth in a second. The other aspect of Tantra, well, actually, I'll bring up two more aspects. One of them being that Tantra is not just about sexuality. It's a spiritual practice that is very much about being fully in line in our beings with the divine and opening up to that divine spiritual connection. And sexuality, in my opinion, is one of the most divine experiences that we can have. It's one of the most connected ways that we can be to God, to spirit. And, in a funny way, I joke that, there's a reason that we say, oh God, when we orgasm. That's the powerful, expansive, unifying connection, both with our partner and with the divine. So with that, the other part of Tantra is the practices that you spoke of. And how do I bring myself more in alignment with both myself and my partner? So let's first talk about the healing piece, because that's what happened to me first. And there's a practice called sacred spot massage. And sacred spot is actually also, the sacred spot is also the G-spot. And what's interesting is that a lot of this wounding that we've been talking about gets stored in our tissues. And without diving into the idea, but there's a concept of cellular memory. And it's like where we've been hurt, where we've been wounded, where we've shut down, those things get held in our cells. And interestingly enough, particularly our sexual and connective wounding gets very held in the cells of our sexual center, our genitals, and the areas all around that. And so sacred spot healing is bringing very conscious touch to our sexual center in a way that's not about let's get off, let's get on, let's get it down, but simply one person giving to another person. So a sexual healer, or as I practiced it with my partner, offering sexual healing. And I want people to know this, is that Tantra and healing can be practiced by two people that are not healers, that are not practitioners, that don't know it all in depth, but we can be incredible healers and awakeners for each other in our monogamous long-term partnerships. And so my partner bringing to me a conscious touch to my vagina, in what's in Tantra called the yoni, or a sacred space. And it's so different than the terms that are used to talk about a woman's vagina. Yoni is an incredibly sacred term, and it changes the whole perspective of how I feel about my body and how a man treats my body. And so bringing conscious touch and even arousal into the G-spot, into that sacred spot, can open up powerful release of stored emotion, powerful release of what we used to believe was true, or we were conditioned to believe was true, and all of a sudden we make friends with, we re-engage, we reconnect with our body. So the first time it happened for me, I realized how much I had disconnected, and all of a sudden it was the first time that I was really feeling my own body again. And following that, there were many times where I would have an orgasm during a sacred spot session, and tears of just release and surrender and healing would come from the various experiences, some of which I've already shared. And so that's the healing aspect of Tantra. And then the connecting and unifying aspect of Tantra is we can learn to breathe together, and how I meet my partner in the breath. It's like, we can breathe in unison, or we breathe opposite each other. And what gets really interesting is when we start to understand the energetic centers of our bodies. So a man's sexual center, or second chakra, for those of you that know what that means, penetrates out of his body. It's a sending or giving energy center. A woman's heart center penetrates off her body. It's a sending or giving center. And we're reversed. A man's heart is actually very receptive and tender. A woman's sexual center, obviously from our anatomy, completely receptive and sensitive. So, men, the way you want your heart treated is how a woman wants her yoni treated. Women, how you want your yoni treated, that's how a man wants his heart treated. And so that's just an extra piece of inspiration there to really honor each other. But now what we can learn through Tantra is that by having the receptive and penetrative parts of our energetic body, we can now circulate energy between ourself and our partner that then amplifies the ecstatic experience that we're sharing. And we can learn to move that energy so that we move from orgasms that are centered in our sexual center to orgasms that penetrate our whole body. And that can happen for men and women. So those are the types of practices that come out of Tantra.
Nice. Yeah, there's a lot of questions that are kind of just popping from just from you sharing. And one that really wants to be asked right now, it seems, is whose responsibility would you say it is in the sexual journey to reach orgasm? And I ask that because I've been with women where they're totally liberated, totally free, and like sparks are flying, energy's expansive, and it's absolutely amazing. And then other women, but you can tell there's sort of this shell, this energetic shell going on, not allowing themselves to really break free and just let loose.
Yeah.
So can you talk just wherever that takes you?
Sure. Yeah. And it takes me really personal because I was one of those women that I couldn't feel anything. I mentioned that. It's like, well, why are they all repressed? And it wasn't them, it was me. I wouldn't allow it. And there was so much a part of me, the way that I grew up, and my need for security, my distrust of men, that I very much kept myself in control. But being in control and having a good orgasm, they do not work together. And so there is a part, yeah, I mean, sorry girls, guys, you gotta give up control if you're gonna have a good orgasm. Now, we could also talk about what some of the fundamental ingredients are. And so you ask, whose responsibility is it? The truth is it's a joint responsibility. And I'd say first and foremost, it's getting access to our own orgasmic energy. And whether that's a woman who feels shut down or a man who can have the different challenges of either premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction, the different things that stop him from having his fullest pleasure, as well as the ways that women stop themselves. And so first and foremost, it's us. Secondly, though, it is our partnership. And particularly for women, there's a way in which our need to feel safe and trust you is fundamentally important for us to being able to surrender. Now, we can have our own self-pleasure where we don't have to trust anybody, and we're just opening in that space of our own self-pleasuring and our own orgasm. At the same time, when we're with a partner, for me to fully surrender, I need to trust you. And that's a piece that men, on a lot of levels, it's like, well, of course you can trust me. And if you really want to be conscious with your partner, is listen to what she needs. Ask her what she needs. And practice different things and notice, when does she surrender more? When does she soften more? When does she open up more to bring more of herself to you? And those are probably the two biggest components. And for women to refine their orgasm, because this was also one of the questions that I think came in ahead of time, was women with low libido. or that are non-orgasmic. There's a lot of different things that play into it. But part of it is our masculine energy. A lot of women have become very powerful and very masculine. And not that we're not powerful in our feminine. The truth is, I think we're more powerful in our feminine as women than we are in our masculine energy. But our masculine energy is very pushing. It's very directive. It's very take control. And that's not where we have our greatest juice. Our greatest juice is in our surrender and our opening. And so that's a big part of it, is that I've got to be able to surrender and open. But if I'm exhausted, women, men, if your woman's exhausted, if you're exhausted, it's not going to lead to good sex. So we've got to take care of ourselves, and we got to find a way to be healthy. And then we got to find a way to trust, and then we got to find a way to surrender. And part of our process and our journey to surrender is making friends with our own body again. And so I'm specifically talking to women here because many of us have disconnected. And this is not uncommon for men either, but it's very common for women to disconnect from this that we've had shame around, this that has maybe led us down a road that we didn't want to go down, but we got ourselves there. And so building that connection. And so that can be as simple as, I've had times where it's like, okay, right now, this is not about getting off. This is not about having an orgasm. Let's just discover what feels good for me right now. And touch me like that. Okay. All right. You just try some different things. I'm going to tell you what feels good. Re-explore, rebuild that relationship. And so this is where, again, talked about we can be our healers, but we can also be our own teachers and awakeners by taking the pressure off and not having to perform and just be like kids on a discovery and learn what are the turn-ons, learn what are the things that give us the most pleasure.
Nice. You mentioned the word surrender a few times, and how important is that? There's a couple of questions. The first one is, how important is it also for a man to surrender, and how do you interrelate surrender and vulnerability?
Good questions. Surrender is critical, truthfully, for both men and women, and it shows up a little bit differently. For women, I would say surrender is very much about stepping out of control and surrendering to our pleasure. When it's starting to rise and it's getting good and it's getting good, and sometimes we'll chase it. Well, chasing that pleasure is the fastest way to send it away. And then also is not, even if we're not feeling it, but we want to feel it and we're trying to go after it, we're trying to find it, forget it. It's not going to work. Is really opening up and just allowing sensation in its subtlest form. Might be that we're just feeling the tiniest bit of sensation on our clitoris. And if we'll just let that be and let it just surrender to it and almost let it expand so that it's now, it's in more of my clitoris. Oh, it's moving it's up into my yoni. Oh, it's expanding into my body. And it doesn't have to all be what we would call orgasmic energy, but it's simply letting the pleasure expand. And so then surrender for a man, I would say, where, yes, surrender is required in your orgasm as well. And yet somehow, and I can't exactly explain why this works so differently, but a man's orgasm, there's a relationship that gets built very early on that, I thought about this. Actually, somebody brought this up to me earlier, I guess it was last year, for most men, the idea that you couldn't access your orgasm is pretty foreign. Not for all, but for most men, the idea that, if I want an orgasm, I can have an orgasm. Not true for women. And so there's just kind of an inherent surrender to your pleasure that happens for men. The bigger place, I think, where surrender is that so many men want to get it right. You guys are awesome. You want to please us. You want to pleasure us. Sometimes you try too hard. And surrender to your own gift as a lover and trust that and be partners with your partner and realize that there's an instinctual part of us that is a lover. And yes, can we learn some more techniques and can we learn how to interact and can we learn turn-ons? Yes, I'm a big proponent of that. but your inherent knowing and your inherent connection to your partner will guide you. So surrender and let go to what you know and what you can create, because the more either one of you is trying to do anything, the more you're going to drive your pleasure away. And there was another piece of what you asked me that I'm forgetting now. Where does that take you? That was it. Thank you. Vulnerability, yes. So the surrender and the vulnerability, there is no place that we are more vulnerable than in our sexuality. And there's no place that we have, I would say, a greater risk of rejection, of getting hurt, of sharing our deepest fears, our deepest fantasies, are the things that we're probably the most afraid of being judged about, come out of our sexuality. And I'll tie love into this as well. It doesn't matter if we're wanting to create an amazing heart connection or an amazing sexual connection. The vulnerability to meet each other authentically, wow, it is so rich with possibility. And that vulnerability to tell the truth about what we desire. And here's the thing for both men and women, is just because your partner tells you what they desire, it doesn't mean that you have to deliver on it. But if either one of you have to repress what you really want, you will never have the fullest connection. You're going to have this separation that happens. And so I invite you to those scariest places of vulnerability, to tell the truth about what you desire, to tell the truth about what you're afraid of, what you're longing for, what you're confused about, and how you're feeling. And if it turns you on, a lot of us hide our turn on. And we don't, it's like, oh, I shouldn't share that. Yes, share it, explode it, give it, bring it, whatever it is. Our sound, let's tie Tantra back into this question and vulnerability. There's a lot of self-consciousness that comes into sexuality. And yet what I can tell you, and man, did it take me a long time to learn this, giving sound to our pleasure amplifies the intensity of our experience exponentially, so much, totally exponentially. And yet for me, that was incredibly embarrassing. But now, man, I will let out the most intense, powerful, not just rock the neighbors, but rock the block screams at times, because there's such a freedom. And what it does is open up that energy. And after those, they're the fullest, most intense orgasms, there will be this most amazing sense of bliss, peace, pleasure, that it's like it's taken everything in my body and just wiped everything that wasn't open and love and free out. And it's just left me in this state of bliss. So vulnerability, incredibly important as we get started, as we deepen, as we've known each other for 25 years or 50 years. Constant attention to vulnerability and constant willingness is a critical component.
Yeah, for me, growing up early on, it was extremely hard for me to receive, because what I had been conditioned to believe about a man is that the man is always delivering the pleasure. And so, I had all of these blocks around allowing myself to open up and surrender and be vulnerable. And can you touch on, how much of a turn on is it for a woman when a man is just totally willing to receive her?
Good question. It's very much, I think there's actually two aspects that get brought up here, because I always use myself first as my own reference, and I go back to that first experience for me. And as much as there were times when I wanted to turn on a man, I didn't know how. And so it held me back, or I felt stupid, or I felt like I couldn't do it right, or was I really turning it on? And then turning him on, and then I would get so attached to, am I doing the right movement? Is it fast enough? Is it slow enough? Is it strong enough? Whatever it is. And that would take me out of being able to experience the turn on. And so that's, again, is finding your own confidence, finding your own trust of yourself and of your partner. And once you've done that, to watch a man who's really willing to feel his pleasure, it's so much better. You know, I can't tell you, I talked about sound a little bit earlier, but when a man acknowledges his pleasure with sound, or the way that he reaches out and touches my body in response to the pleasure that he's feeling, it draws me in. It makes me want to give him more, take him deeper, open more powerfully with him. And so it's very inspiring to have a man respond to his pleasure. And it's kind of, truthfully, when a man doesn't acknowledge the pleasure, it's a lot less inspiring. I don't have as much energy and I don't have as much to offer when I don't get that he's actually really enjoying it. Now, I can tell if he's hard, but there's a difference between feeling him hard and feeling his heart, hearing his words, hearing his sounds. May not be words, actually, I say that, but it definitely the sounds or the way that he moves his body, and it's like, the more masculine expression of pleasure. So hugely a turn on when a man will have his pleasure too and share it.
Nice. So what is it would you say, from a woman's perspective, what are most men missing out on that would help them, like maybe the top two things? What are they missing out on, or what don't they get in general that would help them become better lovers?
One of the things is what I talked about a few minutes ago, and that is trusting yourself, your confidence. Confidence is so sexy. And to be confident in your own body. I've had lots of men come to me and be concerned that their bodies are not adequate enough or their techniques are not adequate enough. It's so much about how you show up and the confidence that you bring and that you trust yourself. Because if you don't trust yourself, there's no way we're going to trust and surrender to you. So I think it's number one is that finding your own confidence in who you are as a man, who you are as a lover. And you don't have to be perfect, let me tell you. It's not about having all the techniques. So many men, it's like, give me all the techniques so that I can do it even better. Yes, some things can help you, but the truth is they're minimal compared to the confidence that you bring. And the second one, that's the first one. So find your confidence. The second one I would say is your presence. And I can tell you, before I talk about presence, I'll tell you about a story of lack of presence for me. And many years ago with a man, and I wasn't connected. We were having intercourse, and he was very much into his pleasure. And this is the counter side to, I don't like the word balance. It's not about we are getting equal, but we're each getting full. We're each having full experiences. And the truth is they're not always the same in every experience. Sometimes it's a man's getting incredible pleasure, but it's time-wise much less than the time for a woman. She takes longer to turn on. But it's really, so coming back to this presence that I was talking about is that he had no idea where I was. There were tears coming out of the corners of my eyes, and he was so into his own pleasure that he had no idea that I wasn't there. And not only was I not there, I wasn't in physical pain, but I certainly didn't feel seen, certainly didn't feel met. And so the second thing as you ask that question is that your presence of being present to me, being present to my pleasure, being present to my heart, being present to my shutdown when it shows up. Because if I go away, I know that's not what you want, but sometimes it's what happens because my mind takes off, or I'll hit a blip in my body and it's like, oh, you've pushed me into a point where that shame shows up. And it might not be strong, but it's just subtle, and I back off a little bit. I pull away. But if you can allow me, if you can just pause for a moment and I get a chance to catch my breath, I can come back to you. And so your presence what allows you to meet a woman where she is and take her further. I love talking about beyond the beyond. But if you take off without her, you're not going to both go beyond the beyond. You move and you'll lead each other, because there's a lot of ways that when a woman opens fully to her sexuality, it invites a man deeper into his. But when a man it creates a safe space, it invites a woman deeper into hers. And yet her wildness can bring out a wildness in the man. So there's a complementary opening for both of us in how we experience and open. But the presence is very, very important. And when we talk about Tantra, you never take your presence off your partner. Yes, you're feeling your own experience. You're having, and so it becomes very interesting, is that you get to fully be engaged with yourself while you're also fully engaged with your partner. And there may be times where we aren't engaged with our partner, but there's a presence in that too, to know that we've chosen to step back. We've chosen to go into the receptive role while our partner is in more of the giving role. And I just want to throw this in because it's fun, but that giving and receiving is even in our kissing. And if I can just open my lips and allow a man to kiss me, and I can fully feel the ecstasy and the pleasure of being kissed, and he's fully with me. And then there's a point at which now I'm going to bring it and let him enjoy the pleasure of being kissed by me. And there's a whole series of things that we can learn in terms of techniques for kissing, but it's this dynamic of being present to each other and where are we right now? Where are we energetically? Where are we emotionally? And so to wind that up, coming back to the presence being the second thing that I think is fundamentally important for men.
Nice. Yeah, really nice. So I know that you've got an event coming up. Is it February 1st or February 2nd?
February 2nd.
February 2nd in Denver.
Yes.
And it's called Liberating Your Sexual Self, and I will definitely be there. What are some of the things that you're going to be covering in there that you can share with us right now?
Oh, I'm really excited about this day. It's a brand new workshop, and one of the things that's become so obvious to me in the last year is not just our sexuality in the bedroom, but this sexually charged, and not like I'm being overtly sexual, but it's turned on. It's like I mentioned earlier, when you're turned on about your business, or we're turned on about our bodies are excited. When I talk about turn on, it's like there's an aliveness, there's a juiciness, there's an excitement, there's a passion, there's a connectedness with our body and what we're experiencing. And so when I talk about turn on, or I talk about living an orgasmic life, which many of you will have seen, what I'm really talking about is bringing this fullness of who we are. And the problem is when we started out talking about sexual repression, when we repress what's going on in the bedroom, we also repress all of our energy. And so part of this day is about just reconnecting simply with ourselves, simply connecting back with what turns us on. Yes, in the bedroom, we'll talk about turn-ons, and we're going to talk about the differences between men and women, and what are the things that are critical components of experiencing a really powerful sexual connection, but also our own turn-on in life. And how do we bring our fullest self to everything? Sexuality, business, life, dance, movement, exercise, health, you name it, all of that. We're going to talk about, I mentioned some of the differences between men and women, and early on I talked about how masculine energy, how much masculine energy I carried. So we're also going to look at that, because when we start to understand this dynamic of masculine and feminine energy, it's going to explain a lot of why at times in our partnerships we repel each other, and at times why we magnetize each other, and we're so on and we're so connected with each other. But we're going to talk about how do you maintain this connection? How do you maintain the chemistry and the magnetic energy that we had? And if we've lost it, how do we recreate it? So that'll be another part of it. We'll go into the pieces that you were talking about around vulnerability and intimacy, and how that is also a critical component. And not just in our sexuality, but in our love. The truth is, there's so many people, there's more singles out there than there are married couples these days. And yet, a lot of us approach our love relationships by trying to be the right person. And the truth is, people don't fall in love with us for our greatness. People fall in love with us for our humanness. We fall in love with someone's vulnerability. We fall in love with someone's tenderness. But that's scary for many of us. So we're going to look at how do we open so that we can really have the authentic connections, how we can really have the love. And then I'm super excited that we have a couple. I have a couple that is coming in to teach a segment on what we call sex magic. And I talked about the power of our sexual energy. Well, so many of us are aware of manifesting practices in the world and how do we attract the things that we most desire and we manifest our dreams. Well, there's a way in which our sexual energy is very manifesting. It's very creative. And so they're going to come in and talk about how do we engage with our sexuality to actually bring our dreams to life. And so that's going to be a phenomenal component of the day. So overall, we're going to spend an incredible day laughing, playing, opening, healing, and discovering what does it mean and how do we go about liberating this sexual being that lives inside of us for life, all of life, including in the bedroom.
Yeah, and I wonder what people will get out of it that they may not even be aware of why they're showing up. And I remember going to your weekend event, and I wasn't really sure where I was going. I just knew that something was kind of pulling me to go. And I experienced some really powerful breakthroughs that, at such deep levels, I didn't even know some of that stuff existed down there. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing what else I might have underneath the surface that maybe I'm not even aware of, and just connecting at a deeper level with myself too. There's a woman who asked a question that kind of plays into, and I know we're kind of getting to that point, but she asks, and I love the way she asked it, or it was a man, maybe it was a man, what is the key to having longer orgasms?
Oh, yes. That's a good question. Longer orgasms are available for both men and women. And I actually think that was a woman that asked that question, but men, I want you to know that this is very much available for you too. And where mine started to extend, and I actually believe the most powerful way to extend your orgasms is through some of the sacred sexuality practices. And it is the conscious awareness that we bring to our orgasm. And the two primary components are breath. How do you breathe? Because a lot of us, when we get close to orgasm, we start to stop breathing. I can think back to a time when I actually realized myself that I literally wasn't breathing. And all of a sudden my partner, just about the time that it's popping into my head that I'm not breathing, my partner goes, breathe, breathe. And I was like, ah. And that opens up the energy. It allows it to flow on a much bigger level and therefore a much longer level. And the other part of it is our sound. And the vibration of sound reverberates through the whole body. And it enhances and extends that orgasm as well. And there's some ways that when a man is looking to extend his orgasm is learning the curve of the orgasm and at what point to bring in the breathing techniques, to what point to bring in the sound. And there's actually some muscular practices as well that can allow that orgasm or the peak of that to be extended from a couple of seconds into many, many seconds. And for those that are practiced, over a minute of actual orgasm time. So lots of things that we can do.
Yeah. It's we're getting to that point where we're wrapping up, and I just really want to kind of open up the space for you just to see kind of intuitively what is it that really makes somebody well, actually, let me just open it up to you. What is it that, like, at a little deep heart level wants to be communicated to our friends that are listening and watching right now?
the first words that come are say yes to your sexuality. And I don't care whether you're completely disconnected and haven't made love or thought about sex in 30 years, or if you're having a good sex life but you know there's more. Say yes. Say yes to that desire. And even if you're at that place where I'm not getting it, I can't feel it, or it's nobody wants me, whatever it is, those limitations are not true. The connection is available for every one of us at every age, and that connection is there on the levels that we want it for. In some ways, women long for more intimacy in our sexuality, and men get to be invited to experience that on a deeper level. And men invite women to our rawness. Like, there's a way that when a man is healthy in his sexuality, there's such an animal nature to it that invites us into more of that release for ourselves. And so it's really about exploring what it is that you desire. And if you're like me, you don't know. And you just got to take one step at a time. And there were times where I can tell you I was pissed and angry making love because I couldn't feel. But that's part of the process too, is just to admit that you're pissed and angry. And it's when I finally surrendered to it, I surrendered to my frustration, I surrendered to my confusion, and just made it all okay, that I could reach out and get the support that I needed, or I could be honest with my partner who could meet me on a different level. And so that's really what the event on the second, that's another piece of it, is just, you don't have to be a sex god or a sex goddess. You don't have to be an amazing lover. You just get to be the full lover that you are and enjoy it with a partner that matches you. And that's my prayer for the world, is that we can walk out of a party and say, I'm going home early because we're going to make love. Or that it's simply we can talk fully, honestly, and openly with our partner and explore on deeper levels. Whatever it is, that's my prayer, is that you find, each and every one of you, and the truth is I continue to do this. I have new openings regularly. I was going to say every week. I don't know that it's really every week, but I think there is a way that even with all the years of study, is that I continue to find new sources of pleasure, new edges. One of my primary Tantra teachers talked about how open is open. How much pleasure can we experience? How much can you expand your pleasure boundaries? There's always more. And so this is a sweet, powerful, passionate way to enhance all of our lives. And that's what I most want for people. And I hope that if people are in the Denver area on February 2nd, it's really inexpensive, $47 for the whole day. And there's some bonuses if you go out on the website and look at it. And if you can't be in Denver, if you're elsewhere in the country, I've actually set it up so that I can't live stream the event yet. That's coming soon. But I'm having it recorded. And so the DVDs will be available. And if you pre-order those before the event, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like 60 or 70% off. So that I'm committed to having as many people want to have this liberating experience that they can have it.
Yeah, we cracked open a lot of stuff in the 2-day event that I was with you at a couple years ago. And I noticed that from that point, as I let go of so much stuff by being with you at that event, as I moved deeper into my own sexualness, my own sexuality, and really just owning it, my creativity explodes. Like, the more I just own my in-depth, my own sexuality, like, my creativity to grow my business explodes like crazy. Is there anything that you want to communicate there before we sign off with our friends?
Yeah. I actually think somebody asked one of the questions earlier was like, I have all this energy and I'm not getting all the sex I want. What can I do with it? And you actually bring it up when you talk about that. Our sexual energy is so creative and so powerful and so inspiring. And there is a way that when, again, we can take that energy and rather than having it all be all centered in our genitals and stuck there and frustrating and wanting more, we can actually breathe it up and move it through the rest of our body and realize that it's a powerful creative energy. And I did a little bit of this before tonight, but I will actually, whenever I'm going to do something important, if I'm going to get on stage, I'm going to go into an important meeting, be on an interview, I'll start to raise my sexual energy by using the muscles because it's part of my life force. It's part of my glow as a woman. As a man, it's part of your potency. And we talk about potency as a lover, but potency in life. And so this is what's possible. Again, it's why I say, although I'm talking about sexuality, I'm talking about life. It's all of this energy when we bring it back to the quote by Dr. Oz of the sexual feminine, that we're not living in the vitality that is possible. It's because we've cut off so much of our sexual energy and we want to bring that back up to all of life. So I love that you asked that question because it is about life and not just about being great in bed.
Cool. Yeah, I get so juiced when we talk about these things and these topics, and just the whole sexual energy gets me so energized. And I'm sure we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but our time has come to an end. So, Joanna, thank you so much for just expressing, your passion, your heart, your genius, your brilliance around this topic. And I'm looking forward to learning more from you.
Thank you so much, George. You have just been, I've watched your unfolding in so many different ways, including and very vibrantly your business and how much you contribute to the world and you contribute to me. And so to share this with you and your own journey, both as you've shared your sexuality and as you contribute so greatly to the world, I'm really honored to have done this with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, maybe part 2 coming.
I like it. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing this with us. It's a turn on for me, and I don't know, George. I get the sense that it's a turn on for you too.
Yeah, I'm about to send out some text messages and see who wants to play with me.
There we go. So thank you all.